Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next...
Dame i gospodo, pozdravite moderatora naredne sesije, Terija Martina.
Thank you.
Hvala. Hvala mnogo svima. Dobar dan. Ja bih morao da kažem da mi se strašno sviđa ova prostorija. Divna atmosfera, sjajna za jedan razgovor koji ćemo voditi, koji možda neće biti baš opušten kao što je ova prostorija. Dobrodošli, dakle, na još jednu diskusiju na Globsig forumu. Ja sam Terija Martin i razgovarat ćemo o Zapadnom Balkanu. Gospodo, sjednite. Govorit ćemo o Zapadnom Balkanu koji je na geopolitičkoj raskrsnici i razgovarat ćemo o perspektivi
regional tensions. Now, as we all know, the Western Balkans have lived in the shadow of
not possible because
It is.
No.
Demokratska transformacija je u mnogim slučajevima zastala. Nacionalizam i istorijski revizionizam se pojavljuju na različite načine. Evropski uticaj je vrlo pod izazovima i treba da se pitamo da li je Evropska unija zaista neizbježna destinacija za region ili je to samo jedno obećanje koje je potpuno propalo. Šta zapravo Evropska unija i partneri mogu da urade da se protiv toga bore i da razgovaramo o tome kako globalna dinamika ponovno oblikuje Zapadni Balkan. Velika mi je čast što imam tako izuzetne paneliste, istaknute lidere u diplomatiji.
Interesting and important region. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us, going from here to the other end, Schmidt, High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. He holds one of the most politically sensitive positions in the region, charged with overseeing civilian implementation of the Dayton Agreement. Next to him, Milo Dukanovich, former president of Montenegro. He's been a central figure in Montenegrin politics for over 3 decades, monitoring and shaping, it must be said, every stage of the country's post-Yugoslav development. Quite remarkable. Please note that President Đukanović will be speaking with us through an interpreter. You will find translation kits underneath your seats or couches, wherever you happen to be seated in the room. Next to him, Sebastian Hartmann, Parliamentary State Secretary at the German Defense Ministry. He has 1 foot in the Bundestag and 1 foot in the Defense Ministry, the Minister of Defense. He represents a key EU voice in this discussion. Next to him, Stevo Pendarovski,
thank you.
Former president of Northern Macedonia. He has led one of the region's most consistently pro-European nations and navigated extremely difficult compromises, it must be said, to advance EU integration. And last but definitely not least, Christopher Hill will be familiar to many of you, former U.S. ambassador to Serbia, lots of other titles I could attach to him, a seasoned American diplomat intimately acquainted with Balkan politics and U.S. regional policy across multiple administrations, it must be said. So, I'm going to begin by introducing our Slido poll. We have a Slido, and this was introduced this morning at the very beginning, and I'll see if I can find it here. It's a question which, if you have access Slido on your phones already, you know how this will work. It's just a simple poll that we're going to do today with a multiple choice questions. There we go. And the question is, let's see if we can get it up. Okay, we have it up on the screen. So if you don't yet have this on your phone, you can use that QR code to access it. The question is, for the poll, what is currently the greatest obstacle to EU integration in the Western Balkans? Is it A, lack of political will in the region, enlargement fatigue in the EU? We hear a lot about that. External influence from wherever, ethnic nationalism and unresolved conflicts, or yeah, okay, that's what we ended up with these. Very good. Plus, rule of law and democratic backsliding, these things move. Marvelous. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get started with a direct set of questions. I'll finally sit down. So, let's start. We'll just start and move down from this end here. Christian Schmidt, so please be patient, Mr. Hill, Ambassador Hill. Start here with Christian Schmidt. The political situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina remains, let's say, fragile. You know this better than anyone. Do you believe that the current institutional framework, as it now stands, do you think that can hold, or do you see us approaching a structural breaking point?
Thank you. If I would not believe that there is an opportunity to use the
da se koristi ta struktura, ta dejtonska struktura
amendments to come along, I would not be able to contribute anything to the country. I think it is. I think that this is now the edge where we have to see that the, let me say, the tradition of defining one's interest and trying to find any part of this implemented should be changed to the understanding there is a joint necessity to sit together and to go ahead. Now, exactly we have in these days the expectation that the preparation for European Union negotiations are made. This is not yet the case. Bosnia seems to have a lot of money, as they not yet managed to get the €1 billion of the growth plan to be done. I know that this is not the case. There's a lack of money, and I'm quite hopeful, quite optimistic that at the end of the year we will stay in a better stage, especially because we see that the framework of external influence does not play in favor of the Western Balkans.
Talking about external influence, do you think that outside actors, particularly Russia, pose a real danger to Bosnia's viability as a country?
Looking on the economic data for Bosnia-Herzegovina, I would not say this is the hotspot of economy, but it is involved very much in between in the neighboring countries, to the neighboring countries in terms of trade, and to European Union. So any political interference, destructive interference, which does not need to focus on getting any economic advantage. And this would fit, in my understanding, to the Russian approach, finding proxies and using the proxies just to make noise. That's the challenge.
Milos Dukanovich, you've long argued that the EU must not abandon the region, but is Brussels not losing influence because it's hesitating to act decisively in the region when democratic norms are threatened?
You are right. Brussels is losing influence in the region. And I will tell you what my impression is. As you said, I have been involved for more than 30 years in the political life of that region. Today, the situation in the Western Balkans is worse than 10 years ago. The reforms have practically stopped. And those are the reforms that should ensure the standard that will make us an organic part of the European civilization. And then it shows that integration is not the top topic, the most important topic anymore. And particularly that there is skepticism about even the prospects that would be foreseeable, the Western Balkans in the European Union. You know, in 2013, Croatia joined European Union, and since then nothing happened. And 10 years before that, in 2003, in Thessaloniki, in the summit EU-Western Balkans, there was a proposal for European Union accepting the idea that by 2014, until 100 years of the Great War, all countries of the Western Balkans should become members of the European Union. And only one of them became a member of the European Union, Croatia, and others are further from the European Union than they were in 2003. So as a consequence of all of that, we have the lack of the main effect that we want to see through integration, and that is emancipation of the Balkan society. Unfortunately, Balkan society is deeply lag behind. And what all of us want in the Balkans, and I assume in the European Union, we want to see reforms. We want to see establishment of the standards, because we want to adapt those societies to live properly in the European Union, united on the shared values. And there is no such an effect in this time. And I will tell you why. First of all, European Union was so indecisive for so long about what to do in the Western Balkans, what to do with its most successful policy, the enlargement policy. If you remember, when Romania and Bulgaria became members, then they started talking about enlargement fatigue. After that, they started talking about dilemmas of whether to continue enlargement before finishing the internal consolidation of the European Union, although it is completely clear that the internal consolidation does not respect on whether European Union has 27 or 35 members. European Union with 27 members is dysfunctional in certain segments, and it requires reforms, but it does not mean that we should then hesitate to admit new members, members from the Western Balkans. Then after that, we got the ideas of Europe at 1 speed, 2 speeds, and after that they changed methodology for negotiations with the candidate countries, and in the end we got European political community. And whatever we call it, my impression is that's a kind of alternative, a substitute, which is offered as something before the membership. So European Union was thinking about what to offer to the Western Balkans instead of the most logical thing, and that is the process of an aggressive enlargement and acceptance of new members from the Western Balkans in the European Union. Of course, we all know that geopolitical vacuum does not exist. There is no such a thing. If European Union is not there, the others will be. So Russia came, and Russia is there, and they activated the stock of their historical heritage in the Western Balkans. First of all, strong pro-Russian sentiments. Russia strengthened their proxies in the Western Balkans. They put them into the function of their own goals and started devastating the values in the societies of the Western Balkans. So the narrative that Russia is sending through their proxies, first of all Orthodox Church, is that Europe is a rotten civilization and that NATO is the Fourth Reich. So that's the narrative. Because of that, we have the public in the Western Balkans which started seriously hesitating about whether it will be possible at all to become a member of the European Union. And I will conclude by saying that I think that this type of devastation of values was neglected quite a lot by the Western policy, particularly the European Union and the United States. They just did not see what was happening in the Western Balkans, and the Western Balkans actually saw the awakened nationalisms. So whenever there is some turbulence from Russia, and whenever Russia starts focusing on the West, first of all on Europe, then the Western Balkan nationalists think it's their time. So what we thought was buried in blood in 1990s, the blood in which we buried former Yugoslavia, now woke up again. And now we have again nationalistic narratives in the Western Balkans, which threaten stability of the region and European prospects of the region. And the experience learned us it is a threat to European stability. That's my brief answer to your question. Thank you.
Much. That puts a lot on the table for us to digest at this point. That the Balkan countries, except for Croatia, are further away from EU integration than they were in 2003. Sebastian Hartmann, Germany has traditionally supported enlargement in the region, but we've seen shifting tones in Berlin and Paris over the last few years. What is Germany's message to the Western Balkans and to skeptics within the EU?
Thank you so much for the question, but also in the reaction of we have heard already, to make it clear we cannot differ between the stability and security of the region of the West Balkan from the European security. It's also What we see, if we look in the past and we are seeing in the history of our country and of our whole continent. So let's make it clear, it's a part of our strategy that Germany took part in the KFOR mission, in the Euro4 Althea mission, and we are doing our part of our responsibility to help to bring it to more stability. And if I may add the point to European Union and the European position, it's not only a question of economy or stability of a region, it's also a question of a political goal, because it's the choice of personal freedom, of a liberal society. And of course we are challenged by Russia, as we already heard, but we are showing a clear path that any country can join the European Union. And we want to ask them to do and go their way also, and to continue this way.
But I don't get that impression, sorry to interrupt you, that's really accepted or believed from what we've just heard, that any country can become a member of the European Union, or do you think that's still, operative?
Yes, it has to be, but on the other hand, it's also a question of the stability in the region, and that is why we're showing presence in the region, because we don't want to have a fall back in the history. We don't want to have a bloody next step, to say it clear. But on the other hand, we are doing a job. We have formed a commissioner for defense, for example. We are spending more money on defense than ever before. We are setting up a European defense industry. We are spending a lot as European countries on the Ukraine war, and we are doing that to prevent any escalation in the region. So I think if we see the new European Union, it's a changed European Union. We are confronted with the new challenges of our time, and we are doing in our way. And I think the narrative of the Russians shouldn't be accepted. This is an illiberal society. We see on the other side an illiberal society. What we offer is freedom, stability, security. And we are doing it as a German state also. Last week there was a decision of the German Parliament to say, okay, in favor of the decision the United Nations will make, and Christian Schmidt already said it, we are doing our part in sending our troops also for more than 26 years.
Okay, out of time, we're going to just keep on moving here. Stevo Pendarovski, North Macedonia made enormous sacrifices. I mentioned compromises earlier for the EU path. It changed its name, among other things. That's what made headlines mainly. But what message does the continued stalling that we're seeing from Brussels, what message does that send to your country and others that are still in the waiting room? How do you see it?
I think that my opinion in this regard shouldn't differ from the opinion of everybody else coming from whatever country of the Western Balkans 6. Then this is certainly a discouragement, a very strong sign of discouragement for everybody who would like one day from the Western Balkans to be full-fledged member of the European Union. Even for the countries who are now at the very early stages of that process are not from the Balkan region, from the Western Balkan region. I'm meaning these three countries from the Eastern Partnership, starting with Ukraine. If that was the reason for freezing the European path of my country towards Brussels, after 20 years of becoming the candidate country for EU membership, out of only one reason, bilateralization of the dispute with our eastern neighbor, which all of a sudden become a European or pan-European problem, then everybody knows, not only in the Balkans, even in the heartland of Europe, there are certainly no single country which doesn't have any problem with its neighbors, about history, about the borders, about what common heroes, and so on and so forth. So that's the main reason why in the latest polling, when I was speaking or asking the Macedonian citizens, what do you think about the integrations, or does it at all still attractive topic for you? As average people living in this country, only 32% of ethnic Macedonians said no. We wouldn't like to see that. We have been in the high 80s, high 90s in favor of the EU membership. Today, we are at the bottom of the Western Balkan list. I'm not quite sure about Bosnia and Herzegovina, about the latest polling, because they're divided along the ethnic lines. And the one percentages are one in Republika Srpska, and in the Federation are completely different, I suppose. But we are today on par with Serbia. Between 30 and 35% of the people living in the country said, okay, we might continue, why not? And I'm not trying to say that everybody should be blamed on the European Union in the past 20 years, of course. We have been quite bad in delivering the reforms. We have been especially bad in delivering reforms, in not delivering reforms, in going into clear autocratic regime in the period 2008, 2016 especially. In the then reports, progress reports by the European Commission, we have been dubbed as the captured state. So it was up to the domestic political leads. I'm seeing the dividing views of the auditorium. Then, more than 20% are saying that local political leads doesn't have the political will to go towards the European Union. There is some truth in that as well. But all in all, if you are really interested as the EU, as an organization, to make out of that organization a global strategic player, you should not, as I would like to repeat that, you should not go into the bilateral problems and importing them into the heart of the European Union. You are not going to expand the European Union. You will not expand that community of democratic nations and values if you are looking into any particular bilateral dispute which can be found, as I said, virtually in each corner on the European continent. And why today it seems to some people that Ukraine and Moldova are with higher chances to become in the foreseeable future members of the EU, and why there are some, let's say, traces of optimism in the Western Balkan region that Montenegro and Albania especially are the front runners and might complete the job by the end of this decade. That is only because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. The complete strategic paradigm has been changed in Brussels only because of that. Put aside what the EU bureaucrats are telling to you or to me or to everybody else. They have changed that strategic paradigm because for the first time on the European continent, we saw a devastating war, one country attacking another country in our backyard, in essence. That means that that's pity to say, but if you do need, as an organization, a war in order to think about becoming a strategic or global player or becoming your expansion, that's not speaking quite well for the so-called strategic thinkers in Brussels.
Okay, so the Ukraine war, you think, is to some degree a game changer here. And of course, we all remember the Balkan wars as well. I was, at that time in the 90s, I was a young anchor at CNN International, and we were following that. And I had the opportunity to meet Richard Holbrooke and followed the developments there at the time. Those memories also persist. Something that may provide some motivation. But let's keep moving. I forgot to remind you that your questions are also welcome. I'm going to go around. You can stand up and deliver questions in a moment, or you can put them on the Slido poll. Either way, if you find it more comfortable to put them on the Slido poll, feel free to do that in Slido, and I'll have access to them here too. I see there's already one anonymous question that's been posted, but we're welcome to get some more. Christopher Hill, U.S. policy in the region. It has had kind of a two-pronged approach. There's been a combination of moral leadership on the one hand and strategic support on the other. We are now in a new administration, Trump administration, Trump 2, not Trump 1, very different Trump administration. Do you expect, moving forward with the Balkans, continuity or disruption in the U.S. approach to the Balkans?
I think to ask anybody what will happen in the Trump administration tomorrow, let alone in the next couple of years, is really an unfair question.
I deal with this every day as a news anchor.
I have no idea.
It changes from morning to afternoon sometimes.
Let me lay out some issues that I think should result in greater interest in the Balkans on the U.S. side. First of all, I must admit, as an American diplomat, I speak for almost all of my colleagues who believe that the best solution for the EU is just to accept them all. and not worry too much about this report card issue of these clusters and chapters, which inevitably gets into a problem of sort of the bureaucratization of the EU. After all, the EU is probably the most important peacetime entity that has happened in Europe in centuries. It is something that every European should be very proud of. It is extraordinary what the EU has accomplished, and they ought to really rededicate themselves to completing the mission. Why I think it's important that all the countries be involved is that inevitably, if you choose one over the other, there will be accusations of favoritism. There will be all kinds of accusations with the net result that you'll probably create more tension than you will have resolved. So that's one point. I think the U.S., I think we have done best in the Balkans, not when we are moralizing, not when we're shaking our finger, waving our finger at everybody who's not quite up to our standards, but rather I think we've done best when we've worked closely together with the EU. I think what was important about the 1990s, and you allude to my mentor and my tormentor, Richard Holbrooke, was the fact that he understood the need to work closely with the European Union, that this is the way to get the project done. Because ultimately, if we have a situation where dealing with a tough problem like the Balkans divides the US and EU, we will have done more harm to the Balkans than good. So we got to stay close to the EU. I think ultimately the EU, it has a tough mission, but it's the mission it's chosen for itself, and I think we can be helpful. For example, I think to the extent that the EU wants to have different tiers of membership, that is joining the single market as opposed to full membership, issues like that ought to be looked at. But most importantly, I think it has to move more quickly. And not allow anybody to say we've been waiting 20 years, as people can truthfully say. I think for the U.S., we need to be active, one, to repair the EU relationship, and I think there's an understanding among sensible Americans, and maybe that is not the majority of us, but nonetheless an understanding that we need to work closely with the EU. We need to avoid a situation where Russia will exploit the divisions, and we've seen Russia. Russia is very competent at soft power. It's kind of surprising to hear the term soft power and Russia in the same sentence, but they're actually pretty good at it. They know how to exploit things, and they know how to appeal to some people and create tensions within the society, and to leave these countries out in this kind of no man's land between two sets of barbed wire is not a very safe for these place for these countries to be in, and so we have to be very careful about that. China, I mentioned China because I think it was one of the first questions that has popped up from the audience. I think it's a big challenge. My own view, having worked with China, especially on the North Korea issue, if you think it is difficult to work with China, try working against China. It is even worse. So, there needs to be an understanding of how we can proceed in the Balkans. So, the Balkans is a very tough issue, but it's made more difficult by the fact that often you have one leader in the Balkans criticizing another leader and saying, choose me, instead of that other leader. I think there's something to be learned from Czechia, from Poland, from Hungary, where they also engaged in this kind of practice in the early mid-90s, saying, we're the best of the three, choose us. And then ultimately realized this was not the best way to make an appeal to the European Union. So they met in a very small town called Visegrad in Hungary, and they announced the Visegrad process. And okay, the Visegrad process is not a big deal today in 2025. I mean, no one remembers, for example, that it was in Hungary. But the Visegrad process held things together for a critical moment. in history. And I think people need to understand that history is not some continuum. It's a set of important moments. And that was an important moment, whether there would be enlargement to the North Central countries. And the answer was yes, thanks to those countries working together. I would urge the countries in the Balkans also, there are Visegráds to choose from in the Balkans as well, a very famous one in Bosnia, actually. I would urge them to try to work together on this so that when very tired Europeans, and there's nothing wrong with being tired, and there are a lot of reasons to be tired, will look at the Balkans and say, you know, okay, we'll bring these countries in, but with this process of working together, we're not going to have to worry about bringing their problems in. We can bring them in. And I think it would be in the interest of the countries to work better together and not always to criticize each other. But I really can't answer your fundamental question because I have absolutely no idea what is going to happen with the U.S. administration. But I can just encourage people in Europe, do the right thing. It will confuse your friends, astound your enemies. It is do the right thing. And I think the right thing is to get serious about enlargement. If European publics are worried about it, figure out a different track where you have central market, but get something done and don't create a situation but that by doing things in one country and not in another, you create more tensions. And don't worry about us. We'll come around. We will get on the right path after we've exhausted all the other roads, and we're in the process of that.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you all. So we're going to look at the results of our Slido poll, first of all, and then we're going to go to some of the questions. We'll look at some of the questions on Slido and get your questions from the audience. So there we go. It's up on your screen here. Well, I mean, you know, it's interesting to see the way that the answers have come out there, that enlargement fatigue in the EU is identified as the main obstacle to EU integration at this point of the Western Balkans. But you also see lack of political will coming in at a close second there. Now, whose political will, of course, would be a question that could follow up on that. But I'd like to get your questions as well. Let's maybe take one, because we haven't really addressed, you know, the Chinese influence in the region very, very carefully. Not that we need to go into it to a large degree. I was just wondering if any of you care to reflect on that? I mean, we heard Ambassador Hill saying that yes, it's difficult, you know, working against the Chinese. You kind of have to work with them in some ways. But they've been active in the region, have they not? Anyone care to reflect?
If I could just follow up on my point, everyone thinks of the Chinese as being long-term thinkers. I don't. I think for them, long-term is actually increasingly what a corporation looks like the next quarter. And I think China is making a lot of mistakes where they have gone overseas, and they're making them in the Balkans. I think there is a sense that they can do things quickly, and often the roads they build are not as good as they should be. The bridges they build are not as good as they should be, and the relationships they build are much thinner than they need to be. So to some extent, I think it's for China to show their weaknesses, not for us to show the Chinese weaknesses. But in another sense, we need to be strong competitors. We need to understand that it is in these countries' interests that we compete for these things and not to allow China to do these things, because I think often it will be second rate. And finally, on all these questions, to any student in the audience taking competitive exams, the correct answer is taking multiple choice exams. The best answer is always all of the above. And I think all of those reasons apply to why there are problems in the Balkans now.
If I may.
I'd like to bring in Milos Dukanovich again here for just a moment. Sorry, I don't want to spend too much time on China. Okay, if you want a very quick follow-up.
Very quickly, I would like to address the point in the question, whether the China is a threat to EU integration.
Okay.
In my view, no, because Chinese are not exporting values, their values. They are only economically penetrating the region, unlike Russians who are coming to the region with their values, which are certainly not democratic ones.
Milos Dukanovich, just one quick question. Is there, in your opinion, I mean, you know this, still a functioning pro-European consensus within Montenegro's political establishment?
Well, it has been under a serious question mark because of what the state policy in Montenegro is doing in the last 5 years. Montenegro was an excellent role model and example in the region of a country where there was a broadest consensus for years about the wish of people to become or to go to the European Union as soon as possible. But in the last 5 years, thanks to the chaos that I described when I was answering your first question, and that chaos, in my opinion, was generated to a large extent from the level of geopolitics. Most of the problems in the region, in my opinion, are generated from geopolitical level. So our current politicians do not find their waves, and that led to hesitation. And I'm certain, regardless of the opinion polls, I am certain that the support to European integration is on a decrease. You know, Montenegro cannot be in a bubble. If you take into account what Mr. Pendarovski said, and if you read media from Serbia about this, it is clear that the entire region started hesitating about certainty that we will become members of the European Union. And Montenegro cannot be completely different from that. But I will be brief, as you said. Central issue is how to get out of this. I don't want to be a pessimist. I have never been a pessimist. I think that there is a way out of this. And the way out is to reactivate the best policy that the European Union has ever had. And that is the enlargement policy. And then European Union shoot itself into its foot. When European Union has to complete the enlargement process without many experiments. That policy, enlargement policy, was good while it was based on clear standards and clear rules. Meet the standards, you will become a member of the European Union. And today you can hear different rationales. What concerns me is that in the last couple of years, we could hear the administrative and technical approach to the enlargement as the most dominant one. And I think that European Union should go back to the political approach to enlargement. And if European Union wants to be a geopolitical player, which will be competitive in the new geopolitical order which is emerging in front of our eyes, I mean, we are talking that we want to argue with China. No, we are not going to argue with China. China is there. It's a very important geopolitical actor. Who doesn't see that, he is blind. And we want to see where Europe is in all of that. If Europe wants to be competitive, it has to cover its weak spots. And the weakest spot for it is the Western Balkans. It doesn't have to be lenient to Western Balkans. Western Balkans should meet conditions to become members of the European Union. And that's how European Union will be united and geopolitically competitive. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that constructive suggestion. Christian Schmidt is sitting next to me. I see you shaking your head and nodding. I sense you have something to say about that.
I have a lot of sympathy for the assessment of President Đukanović. He has experienced in his time about the NATO access of his country, that the proxies tried to do their work against this. He has represented a country where I think the general mood is to become member of European integration. So that is why they are now. But what is the answer if you say, come on, friends, if you want to become member of European Union, you have to get merit-based approach. Acquis communautaire, 100%, think like this, and now start working. And maybe it could happen that some of those political actors maybe vocally are talking about becoming member of European Union. Internally, but to think, why should I go? That's our challenge, because there is the disruption between the people and the political, some parts of the political class. I may refer to Mr. Pendarovski's reference to Republika Srpska and the Poles. We have got recently polls that, including in Republika Srpska, this was just short before the great uproar of Mr. Dodik, how many percent wanted to be integrated into Serbia? 4%. Mm-hmm. Undecided some, and the majority for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And another argument, the decision where they want to go, the people, not the political interest bearers, is for me very clear, where this is a kind of voting by feet. We have, and I'm talking about Bosnia-Herzegovina because it's front runner, unfortunately, with losing people. Do they go? Where do they go? From Banja Luka to Moscow? I haven't heard about this. They are just trying everything, understandably, to come to European integration. So that's the message. The answer in the Brussels, I see indeed we have to rethink. And I say this now, moderator, not in my competence now, but as a former member of the Ministerial European Council. So I'm allowed to say this.
Absolutely.
We have to think what is in a situation when in some countries, I would exclude some where I have a broad common sense for European integration. But what is the way, if we have a geostrategical interest to have the whole region embedded in a European integration in terms of stability and somehow economic stability as well, not only security stability, then what can we offer? So we feel that the way chapter and cluster is necessary, important, but maybe we come to a situation that we are getting lack of tools. Should we rethink about having a step-by-step approach? It could not happen that some countries are waiting for 20 years since 2003 Thessaloniki, and now we would say, come on, we'll look a little bit, maybe next year. I think young people are making their decision now. This is the political challenge for the region and for Bosnia-Herzegovina. And if I'm allowed just to say 2 sentences about Bosnia-Herzegovina and the special situation, which cannot be compared to other countries. This is, sometimes I feel it's forgotten why, including my position was created, done by wonderful Dick Holbrooke, because Dayton is not the idealistic draft and consent of the paradise in future. It was, in this time being, the only possibility to end the war and to end the bloodshed in this country. And this was successful 30 years. It was more about giving opportunity to develop the constitutional situation of a country. So there is where we are not yet where we should be, and it is including as well on this. I wanted to say about security. This is a Chapter 7 country. Sometimes I'm
meaning what for?
Meaning
we might not understand.
that the United Nations Charter, this country is seen by decision of the United Nations Security Council that there is the danger of a crisis, and there is why there is EUFOR Althea, which is basically a UN mission, and why there is this unique situation of the, should I say, controller, which is my position.
Yep.
This should end, yes, but there you need to have a framework of security guarantees. And sometimes you won't get this only with acquis communautaire.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I feel remiss in my duty as moderator to have integrated questions directly from the audience, but it was important, I think, that we hear from the voices of those here on stage who are involved in this process and impacted by this process that we've been describing. Again, it's a great, I want to tell all of you gentlemen that this is a great honor for me to be sitting here with you and discussing this particular topic that frankly has been elusive for me to fully grasp over my years as a journalist. It's a devilishly difficult situation and complex, but I sense from the panel that there may be ways forward that will bring peace and stability over the long term to the area, together with prosperity, and we should hope a modicum of sustained unity. I want to thank our audience for being with us here for this talk, and I would love to continue it. If you wish to submit any ideas on this that may help the idea, I'm sure the progress on this topic, I'm sure GlobeSec would be happy to listen to it as well. Anyway, thank you all for being with us. I should tell you that coming up very next, stay in your seats if you wish, because we've got a program continuing with protecting children online right here, which is an important challenge for all of our societies right now, given what's happening in that space. A warm round of applause for our speakers.